Charlotte from Cass Art, and on behalf of all of the engagement team, I'd like to say a big welcome to Cass Art's free thinking space. It's designed to be a space where you can play, listen, talk and inspire, and it's been a 4-day festival with talks, workshops and performance art over the last 4 days. This concludes the 4 days with an evening on art education, and we're delighted to have our 2 guest speakers here today. Around you, incidentally, is one of the reasons why Cass Art supports art education. It is our 47 student ambassadors who are across the UK, and they volunteer for the year to represent Cass Art in their institution and are supported in their studies. And the final hurrah, if you like, is the work that you see on the wall around you. So that's all I wanted to say. Without further ado, we'll go into our first speaker, who is Sir John Sorrell, Chairman of University of Arts London, Chairman and founder of the Creative Industries Federation, co-founder and president of London Design Biennial, and with his wife Frances, he founded the Sorrell Foundation, which we're really pleased to support their National Art and Design Saturday Club, which allows 14 to 16-year-olds around the UK to study art and design on a Saturday for free. So, without further ado, Sir John Sorrell.
Thank you. Okay, now, I had the most fantastic slide presentation prepared for you and a film, but it seems to have crashed the computer. So, I'm just going to talk. And maybe it's just as well, because that means I'll be quite quick. And then we can get on with the rest of it. And I think the most important part tonight really is probably having a conversation with you in a short while. So where shall I start? I'll start in 1837, very important date. Anyone know why that's so important? It's not an exam question, it's just interesting. It's the date the very first ever Government School of Design was created in Somerset House, London. And it's very important to remember that it actually goes back a very, very long way. It was at Somerset House. It eventually moved to the Royal College of Art, but it was actually the beginning of everything. It's a long time ago. It's a government initiative. Most of them don't work, but this one did. And what we've got, and I love to say when I travel the world as a UK business ambassador for the creative industries, sounds very grand, doesn't it? Is I say to people that it's one of the things which completely underpins the success of Britain's creative industries, which government ministers are very keen to stand up all the time and talk about being one of our great success stories. They reel off the facts and figures: 84 billion, 1 million pounds to the economy, over 2 million jobs, growing 4 times faster than any other sector. Anyway, I'll come back to all that. But you have to imagine me as a 14-year-old boy at school in North London. And one day my art teacher came up to me, a man called Mr. Ramsey, and said, "Would you like to go to Saturday classes at Hornsey?" which was my local art school. I said yes, I went along. I turned up there with a load of other 14-year-old kids. Well, there were actually only about 12 or 15 of us from a number of different local schools in Crouch End and Hornsey and Muswell Hill, which is the local area. And there was this very old guy in the room who was obviously running it with some other old people. But I found out later the old guy was a man called John Hoyland, who, as you know, is a great painter, a great artist. He was actually 26 at the time. But when you're 14, it appears old, doesn't it? Someone's 26. The other old people, not as old as him, were actually students at Hornsey. And they were running this Saturday class, which again was the result of a government initiative, believe it or not. It's a policy initiative which grew up during the Second World War and just afterwards, where they decided that one of the things the country would need after the war was better designed stuff to sell people around the world in markets, trade markets. They were interested in designers. Sorry, not artists, but they're interested in designers. Anyway, about a year later, 12 months later, I was there on Saturday having a lovely Saturday class, and somebody said, "Would you like to take the exam to come to Hornsey full time?" So I said, yeah, what do I have to do? They said, well, here's a piece of paper, draw something. What do you want me to draw? Anything you like. So I drew it, can't remember what it was. And 12 weeks later, a little green postcard arrived at my house, and it said, you have been accepted for a full-time course at Hornsey College of Art. That's the way to do it, isn't it? It's much quicker then, no messing around. Please tick one of the boxes below to denote which course you would like to take. And it had these little boxes, and it said things like fine art, ceramics, graphics, printing, sculpture. So I waited till my dad got home from work. Now, he was a milkman. He got up at 4 o'clock every day and went off to do a milk round. He was back by about 2 o'clock most days. And I was waiting till he arrived, and he came through the door, and I said, Dad, what about this? What do you think? And he looked at it. Now, in those days, I grew up on a council estate in North London, and everybody left school at 15 and got a job, because that's what you did. I never heard the word university mentioned when I was a child. I didn't know what it was. I'd never set foot inside an art gallery when I was a child. It wasn't part of the language of the working class in those days. So I said to my father, what shall I do? What do you think? He said, well, do you like it? I said, I absolutely love it. He said, well, God knows what was going through his mind. And he said, well, what are you going to do then? So I said, I don't understand what these things are. He said, nor do I. Then he looked at it again and he said, I think you better tick this one. It looks like the only one that's got any money in it. And it was called commercial art. So I went off to Hornsey, and in those days you could go at 16, and I finished my 3-year course, which is what it was, in commercial art, although I spent a huge amount of time painting, drawing, printing, doing everything imaginable. But I had a sort of thread running through it, which was design. And that's what when I was 19, left Hornsey and started doing with a mate of mine who was at Hornsey. We started up our first business. When I was 19, he was 20, 21. And now this is sort of boring life story, but one of the points I want to make about the future of art education, and I'd like to couple that with the word design, because I think so many kids do art and design at school, and they can, the world's their oyster. They can sort of do anything, really. And you don't have to be restricted to a pigeonhole. I've had this weird life where I set up a business at 19. It lasted 7 years. Didn't work in the end financially, although we won lots of awards and did some great work. Then I went to work for someone for 4 or 5 years, and then I set up a business with my wife, Frances. We ran that for 25 years. It became the biggest design business in Europe, and we eventually sold it at the end of the 90s. Along the way, I got interested in the way that things work in business, and I ended up chairing the Design Council, which is a public body. I then chaired the Commission for Architecture and the Built Environment. I got quite interested in stuff to do with politics, and I ended up becoming a UK business ambassador. So I go abroad and speak for Britain, and I tell people how brilliant we are at the creative industries, every part of it. And I know that helps business we do around the world. At the moment, our creative industries sector is probably the only one that can open a door for a conversation in most places in Europe. We're not going to walk in with a financial conversation or one about construction. Creative industries, it's a common conversation because everybody loves it. Absolutely everybody loves it. So I find myself in this sort of strange place in life now where I'm a kind of, I juggle lots of plates. Yes, I am chairman of UAL, although I'm the only person there who hasn't been to university, which I think is quite funny. I am also chairman of the London Design Festival, which is now the biggest design festival in the world. Happens in September. This year, I'm starting the London Design Biennale, which will be like Venice and art, but it won't be Venice and art, it will be London and design. 35 countries exhibiting design installations at Somerset House. It's going to be fantastic. I'll be looking at some of them, some of the exhibits coming along today. But the thing which is closest to my heart and what Mark knows us for is the Sorrell Foundation's work with young people. So when Frances and I sold our business in 1999, we set up our foundation. And since then, we've worked with 10,000 kids around the UK in a number of projects, the last one of which is the one which is most important to me, because basically it goes back to where I started and where Frances, my wife, did, because she also did Saturday classes when she was a kid down in Epsom in Surrey. And actually, on my slides, sorry I can't show you, but there's photographs of loads of people who did Saturday class at that time. And many of them went on to become, very, very, very good artists, designers, architects. And it all started when they were 14 years old. Our foundation in the last 7 years has been running something called the National Art and Design Saturday Club. And what we do is ask institutions called universities and colleges, who all have buildings, which is quite handy. They've all got good facilities, which is very helpful. And on Saturdays, the one thing they haven't got is anybody to teach. They've got the central heating on in the winter. There's security people all over the place. The lights are on because of all the insurance policies, but they haven't got anyone to teach. So what we do is go to them and say, how about you taking some kids from local schools on a Saturday and teaching them? So the tutors who normally teach during the week come in and they teach on Saturdays. The kids are nudged there by their local art and design teachers. They're aged actually now 13. We've dropped the age of entry, 13 to 16. And they do 30 Saturdays. It's about 3.5 hours a Saturday, so it's about 100 hours of extra tuition. So you get fantastic tuition, you get access to amazing facilities that schools don't have, and it's free. We then do 3 big interventions. We bring everyone for a visit to London in the November, which is near the beginning of the term. 70% of the kids have never been to London, 70% have never been inside an art gallery. So we take them to art galleries. They come down. We ask them all to do one lovely thing, which is we ask them all to bring a self-portrait with them. And we immediately have a pop-up exhibition of all the self-portraits. It was easy when we started. We had just 4 colleges. We've now got 47. So we have 1,200, 1,500 kids in the Saturday Club. We bring them all down for their visit on over a Saturday and a Sunday. It's absolutely amazing, unbelievable. These kids, the only escalator most of them have been on is in a shopping centre, but it's quite different to the one when you get on the escalator at King's Cross to go down to the tube. The screaming's quite something else. It's very interesting. They go to all the galleries in London. We've got arrangements for everyone. They get curated tours, which is beautiful. In the middle term, we do an intervention with people giving masterclasses. So we ask everybody. It's from architects like Richard Rogers. It's artists like Anthony Gormley. It's Jeremy Deller. It's designers like Paul Smith. And they give a masterclass either at their place or at the institution. So they travel, all the kids come to London. And in the third term, we have a show which we call the Summer Show at Somerset House in the galleries there, which is where we're based. We also do 3 tutors meetings where we gather all the tutors together. We've got about 150 tutors working on the programme. And it's the only show in town where they get together. They never talk to each other, never see each other. So we do one each term. And what they do when they meet is share best practice. It's absolutely fascinating to see everybody improving the way they're teaching. So what's it all about? It's actually what the tutors say to us. They say, you know what we're doing, don't you? And I say, I know what you're going to say. And they say, we're teaching a mini foundation. And I said, I know, because that's what they're now doing. They're basically teaching a mini foundation over 30 Saturdays during the higher education academic year, plus the interventions. And you see these young people dramatically changing, because not only does their work improve, of course, but what you see is their self-esteem growing, their self-confidence and their self-belief. And the summer show is deliberately designed to reinforce that, because we run it like a sort of little graduation ceremony at Somerset House. They all bring their parents, family, and we award everybody a certificate. There are no losers. Everybody wins. And they all come up on stage, shake hands. They all dress up. Don't ask them to, but they do. Parents are in the audience, clapping and cheering. And that's what the club's about. We are, as I say, in 47 locations. We're in Grimsby, we're in Hastings, we're in Hereford, we're in Derry, We're in Coleg Cigar in South Wales, very interesting. We discovered there's no sixth form in schools in this particular area of South Wales. The only act in town is the college if you want to go on and do further study. So that's sort of where my heart is at the moment, although I'm doing lots of other stuff. And one other thing to say to people here who might be becoming artists, so most people look as if they're already artists here, but life changes. You can do all kinds of different things. If someone had said to this 14-year-old kid when I went to Hornsey on that Saturday morning, you're going to end up chairing national bodies, you're going to be a UK business ambassador, you're going to run a successful design business, and you're going to be lucky enough to be able to start a charity which gives lots of young kids the same kind of chance you have, I would have been absolutely amazed. That's the message I want to get across, because I actually think you can do anything. And in this world that we're very lucky to be in, we really can do anything. We're the people who can change the world. I think our creativity as a country is what makes us special. That's what's special about this country, and we haven't heard enough about it lately. And I think everyone in this room should be proud of what they do. They should please encourage other people, especially kids, to really, really make the most of their talent, make the most of their opportunities, and hopefully enjoy some of the great world that we've been enjoying. Thank you.
So this is me in the National Art Education Archive, which is at Bretton Hall. And Bretton Hall was an amazing experiment in arts education, really. It's where all the League of Gentlemen went and got taught, people standing around holding, wrapped in Bako foil, pretending that they're performance artists. It was an extraordinary thing. And it kind of collapsed, really. Margaret Thatcher closed it down, and it used to teach art teachers. But it kept this archive. And actually, what was amazing about it, out of the ashes of Bretton Hall came the Yorkshire Sculpture Park. So something really, actually incredible happens in the depth of disaster. Something amazing can happen. But it has this archive, and for me, it represents almost the sort of the dissolution of art education in a way. And these people, these archivists, were once lecturers at Bretton Hall. In fact, the man who set up Yorkshire Sculpture Park was a lecturer at Bretton Hall. And they're like monks, Catholic monks, lost in this decaying monastery of arts education with the archive. And they wanted to celebrate 30 years of holding the archive, and they invited me to make a show about it. But it was like monks, going through all the material, going, look, they used to do this, they used to do that. And in West Yorkshire, in the West Riding, they believed in art education like Michael Gove believes in getting rid of art education in schools. They really believed it had to be at the core of children's experience, and for lots of different reasons. So I made a show there, but then I also made this piece which is like a kind of a piece of Americana style signage that says "Art makes children powerful," and that's still there if you go to the Yorkshire Sculpture Park. So it was quite a modest show. In these galleries, but I decided that I wanted to create a little shrine around some of the key figures in art education. So I'll just quickly whiz through that. So you probably recognise him from the sculpture in the Royal Academy of Sir Joshua Reynolds. I've got his glasses here, his samovar head. But so on each sculpture it says, this is whoever it is. So this is Sir Joshua Reynolds, and in a way, in terms of visual art, the Royal Academy was really the Google of its day when it was set up. It was really an enlightenment project. You had Darwin cataloguing the species, but you had people like Sir Joshua Reynolds and the Royal Academy. They were cataloguing what was going on in Renaissance and in Greek art. So the only way that you could understand Greek art, had you not left the UK, or Roman art, was to see the casts in the Royal Academy. You would go to the print room to see what the Sistine Chapel looked like. So it really was a repository of great art, and it was the Google of its day. It had enormous problems. It was probably a deeply misogynistic institution. It had 2 female RAs at the beginning, and then not another one till the 1930s. So it's not all good news at the Royal Academy. One of the things about studying at the Royal Academy, it had lots of female students. One of the things about at the Royal Academy, and you've got to remember art was figurative in those days, it was all about understanding the form and anatomy. So that was one of the key things at the Royal Academy still. The life room is one of the key spaces that people want to see. Women were not allowed to see naked figures. So they felt that they were being disenfranchised, actually, in their artistic activity because they weren't allowed to actually draw the anatomy of the figure. So they were discriminated against at the Royal Academy. So it's not all good news, but the Royal Academy still was this incredible repository of information. And then around this space, around him, are early manifestations of art education. These are all the slides from the Royal College, where they were teaching people about a lot of the same kind of images from Renaissance Italy. And then these are various students' tests in art schools of the time. But and in the next room, I've got two little sculptures. They're all each one has a sort of radio or a TV as its head because they're broadcasters. This is Franz Zizek. Franz Zizek, after the First World War, people were trying to understand why the First World War happened and what was its effect on humanity. How could humanity be so unbelievably destructive? And people felt, well, the answer to that is actually, on some level, children's creativity. Leaping on, this is A.E. Halliwell. A.E. Halliwell was a graphic designer. A.E. Halliwell at Camberwell set up the first course in industrial design. He's famous for developing the roundel, the London Transport roundel. But he also designed this. I mean, you can't really see this, but that is the original Dig for Victory gouache. So this archive has these amazing original 1930s gouaches of this great period in graphic design, actually, which was all about some sort of incredible development in visual communication. So A.E. Halliwell has a rather 1930s, 1920s radio for a head. And then this is Don Pavey. So this is jumping onto the 1960s, and this is where this is the sort of era that resonates with me, really. This in West Yorkshire and across the country really would have been an absolute high point in children's art and design education. And they did all sorts of experimental and interesting things. And Don Pavey was interested in game theory, and he was also interested in colour, and he was interested in computers. And he taught at Kingston School of Art, amongst many other places. So he has a groovy 1960s orange television for a head. And all around him is children's art from that era. And this is very interesting, actually. These two, you can't really make it out, but it's a picture of a bonfire. So the idea, and actually this is completely different from anything that children do in art school today, because what they would do is make a sustained work over, maybe 4 or 5 weeks. They would begin by painting the background, they would begin by painting the grass, and then they'd paint all their mother's family on one side, or their father's family on the other side. They would paint the explosion of the bonfire, they would paint all the different sparklers and things going off, and each work would be an individual manifestation of that child's experience of that kind of idea. So that notion of bringing out the individual voice of the child was a really important thing. So that's a kind of movement in art education. But in 1956 at Bretton Hall, there was a huge battle, and art educationists fell out with one another because the foundation course was really invented or developed with this guy at the centre of it, also Richard Hamilton and Victor Passmore, and Harry Fubron, but they developed this thing called the foundation course. And what it was, at long last, it was grabbing the language of the Bauhaus in Germany from 1912, 1913, 14 onwards, and inserting that into British culture. But they only got to do it in 1956. It was a huge updating of art education. But the child art movement people felt that that was instrumentalist. And so there was this huge battle, and they were shouting at each other. And all the child art movement people, it was really a kind of clash of cultures, but it was also two people trying to do different things, because the updating of art education that Tom Hudson developed when he was developing the foundation course was really bringing the language of the 20th century, which was all about design, into art education. And of course the child art movement, that was kind of at odds with it, but the child art movement people were thinking about kids. Tom Hudson was thinking about further and higher education. So it was a bit daft, their battle. One of the things they have in this archive, this is Tom Hudson, and it's a later thing that he did, and it's quite funny. He's teaching art, and he's teaching principles of foundation teaching in Canada on a kind of open university course, and the archive has all the materials that they used on the rostrum camera at the time. And then he made all these different books about how you teach people art education. And it has some quite funny things in it. It teaches you, well, you can't really make this out, but it teaches you how to draw a cubist glass. So you start with a normal glass, and then you upend one end of it and twist the other end. So it's quite a funny sort of thing. And then this is where it really goes wrong. So this is Kenneth Baker. And Kenneth Baker, it's unfortunate and it's unfair, but he has a computer for a head. And this is Kenneth Baker, who ruined art education. And one of the things that Kenneth Baker did, Kenneth Baker wanted to get rid of art education, but he was persuaded not to if they made it rigorous. So that was when all the hoops and hurdles of educational attainment came into the arts. So gone were the teachers thinking, wow, that's an amazing piece of work. In came a load of quite complex language, which kids had to, score different amounts for the kinds of things that they were doing. And that really sort of screwed up, in a way, one of the heuristic developmental aspects of art education. But it's a little bit unfair, because in education at that time they developed computer design technology. So on the walls of this, I chose some of these early attempts at computer design technology, which are a bit poverty-stricken, really. It tends to be lots of wheat ears and cornfields. But it was the beginning of something quite interesting in terms of design teaching, actually. And then this is looking today. One of the other heroes of trying to keep art education in schools, arts education in schools, is this lady called Leslie Butterworth. And if there's anybody thinking about engaging in any kind of educational activity, I really urge you to join NSEAD, which is the National Society for Educators in Art and Design. She is the president of that. And a few years, so this is looking at what is happening now. So, and then I had some quite fun things in here. One of the things that I think is that now we're at a stage where we need to grab all the digital technology, much like Tom Hudson grabbed all the language of the Bauhaus, and plough that into art education, revolutionise art education, because there's a whole gang of young people out there who understand computer technology in a way that my generation doesn't quite, and they're all desperate to teach, but they're not being encouraged by the love isn't there from our politicians to develop art education and make it and update it for the 21st century. So in here I've got things like, there's a company called they make something called electronic paint. And not only is this paint conductive, but when you touch the dinosaur, if you touch it lightly, it mews like a cat, and if you push it harder, it barks like a dog. It's only when you really push it that it growls like a dinosaur. So it's kind of clever paint. And then here, this is a kind of 3D pen. There's an animated work on there by a young artist who works with kids. And then this is a project that I do called the Arbrove template, which is an Instagram project. So you can go on your phones right now, stick in Arbrove template, and you can see this continual conversation between people sharing images and copying those images and making new images on Instagram. And then I'm going to whiz through this. This is me trying to save old flow. One of the things that I've become is a bit of a campaigner for the arts. This is where it really first started, and this was to do with social media as much as anything. We did a flash mob where I suddenly thought, we've got to save this sculpture Old Flow, which Tower Hamlets Council wanted to sell off. So I thought, how am I going to do that? I'm going to dress as Old Flow and try and create a flash mob outside Tower Hamlets Council. I rigged it a bit. I had a few of my students. It's a complete coincidence, but I teach at another institution called the CAS, and I rigged it. So I got, which is in Tower Hamlets. So I got all my students down there. But I was saying on social media, I was saying, well, I'm going to go and buy a green dress now. I'm going to go to accessorise to get my tights. I'm going to be at Tower Hamlets Council offices. When I got there were 20 women dressed as Old Flow, as well as my students. We had a magnificent protest. We filmed it. It was in The Guardian. And actually, it wasn't the reason why Old Flow has been saved for the public realm, but it was the beginning of creating a broader conversation about that. And it created a bit of solidarity. And out of that, I felt, well, how can we create more solidarity to think about how we can try and persuade Michael Gove to stick the arts at the centre of the curriculum? So I thought, well, I'm going to organise a conference, and it's going to be called the Art Party. We won't know whether it's a political party or whether it's just a party. In fact, it was just a party, but it was a politicised party. In the film, I've got this wonderful actor called John Voice, plays Michael Gove. So this is Michael Gove coming up with the national curriculum in the bath with his private secretary. And he's joined by a wonderful musician called Tim Siddle, who's known as the Flameproof Moth in the film. And there he is deciding to go up to Scarborough, where we held the conference. Scarborough is the place in 1956 where some of the summer schools were held, which developed the foundation course. So there was a point to Scarborough. And we took this object, which is my letter to Michael Gove, and it states all the reasons that I could think of why what he was doing was completely wrong with the EBAC and marginalising, diminishing the role of arts in schools via the EBAC. And so this letter has virtually not been on show since I painted it in 2011. It's been touring the country in various different places. It's been to Ireland, and recently I've made a spoken word record of the text, which I'm going to begin to promote and try to get out there, because it still has unfortunately, it still has a relevance. And then this is a slightly self-aggrandizing photograph, slightly aided by the NSEAD, but we managed to get 2,000 artists and teachers to Scarborough to talk about why the arts are important in children's lives. And then that led to me thinking, well, I've got to run against Michael Gove in last year's election. So I stood as an independent candidate for the arts in Surrey Heath. What was very interesting, and it was a political awakening for me, there's no good going to a mainly conservative area and saying, I hate the Tories, because no one's going to vote for you. But if you talk to people about the issues and say, look, we've got to have art in schools, you can win people round. And actually, I had 3 Tory councillors follow me, and then we became quite good friends, and they were saying, actually, you're right. it's stupid to diminish the arts in schools. But the reason why we're conservative is because this is a conservative area, and if we want to stop a house building scheme or a road development, or we want to promote our businesses in a couple of cases, you have to be a councillor in the Conservative Party in this constituency. And actually that was very interesting. It opened my eyes slightly about politics, and has made me an advocate for proportional representation. So here I am with Michael Gove. Michael Gove is quite a genial sort of person. I managed to get him to hold my sign, all schools should be art schools. But Michael Gove is the kind of man who would say, and I would be saying to him, I really believe in social mobility. He actually does believe in social mobility. I think the arts and creativity are about social mobility. And he would say, absolutely, Bob. And then he would turn around and do everything to try and destroy the arts in education. So he's a kind of mad sociopath, really. But he wants to, he will tell you exactly what you want to hear and then sign your death roll on the way out, basically. And talk about the Troika. There was an art school space. And then this is just to allude to somebody who I think is a really important person, and if you don't know them, go away and look at them. Hannah Arendt was this amazing person, and I'm just going to quickly tell you about her. Hannah Arendt was Heidegger's girlfriend in the 1920s and 30s. Heidegger began to think that Hitler had some pretty cool ideas, and he actually shot Hannah Arendt, who was Jewish, to the Gestapo. She fled Germany to live in Paris. She became friends with all these Frankfurt School intellectuals like Adorno and Walter Benjamin. But then when the Nazis came into Paris, she had to flee Paris. She was actually interred by the French government in a prison camp called Camp Gurs. She escaped, and she got to the States. All her work in the post-war period was trying to understand what happened in Germany in that period, and her conclusions were that democracy is only kept alive by participation, association, and performance. So you have to be able to perform, you have to be able to associate, and you have to be able to participate. And in fact, there's an onus on the individual to do all of these three things to keep democracy alive. That's why the arts are so important in our schools. Art is a serious business. It is, of course, about design. It is, of course, about the country can only talk to each other if it, creates wealth, and that's why design is important. But it's also about human rights. Thank you.
So we can field sort of 3-4 questions. So with the EBAC that Bob mentioned, where essentially students at GCSE have to study 7 subjects, none of them creative, and we will see a dwindle of studies of GCSEs, what can we do in this country to ensure that there still is creative industries in 10, 15 years' time?
The first thing is to recognise that all subjects are creative. And I don't think we do ourselves any good by separating ourselves off as something different and special and a bit strange and weird, perhaps. That's one point. The second point is we've got to get art and design into the EBAC, because unless the whole system changes, then what you've got to do is, if you like, get inside it. So that's, for me at the moment, the goal, get art and design in the EBAC. And to do that, we have to argue the economic case to the politicians. And that you might find a bit strange me saying that, but the politicians are interested in creating more income for the country. So I chair the Creative Industries Federation, which is I won't bore you with all the details, but that's what we're lobbying for and arguing at the moment. We keep banging on about how the creative industries delivers £84.1 billion to the economy, over 2 million jobs, growing 4 times faster than the other sector. George Osborne says this standing up in his speeches. Cameron says it. We've now got to get Theresa May to say it, for God's sake. So what we've got to do is get the idea that it isn't this funny, flimmy-flammy thing that weird people do. It's actually something which helps the economy. I believe it also makes everybody's life better, But that's not the argument you're going to win. So you've got to go in and attack in the area where you might win. And we do have to make the case. And NCAD, of course, are completely brilliant and absolutely amazing at all of this. But it needs a completely joined up and concerted effort by everyone in the creative industries. And that's not easy because lots of people say different things. It's very easy for politicians to turn around and say, well, you say that, but they say this, and they say the other thing. So divide and rule is a problem. But for me, that's the goal at the moment. All I can say to you, to sort of provide some hope, is that politicians come and go, as we see every time you turn your news on your mobile, another one's changed. So politicians do come and go. What we need is a really serious embedded policy for art and design in education, and we've got to make the case for it. And a large part of that case, I'm afraid, has got to be about the economy. That's what the Creative Industries Federation is working on all the time, right now, and working away with everybody else.
Are there any countries that are approaching art and design education better than us? And what can we steal from them?
I don't know. You see, I think in a weird way, we do art and design education in an extraordinary way. In fine art education, there are other countries that do extraordinary things, but we've had a history of having, sort of 2 polytechnic and a university in most of our major cities. And in Leeds there's 3 art schools. So actually, and although in one of the things about the education reforms is that if there is a good head teacher, there is amazing art education going on in this country, partly inspired by things like the Saturday clubs. So it's not all a dark picture, but when you look at across the country, it's a picture which is, the tide is going out, and it's because of the political love. I think other countries, in a way, that's kind of where we're heading. If I've just come back from New York, if you want to be an artist in New York, you've got to go to Harvard or Yale. Well, how are you going to afford to do that? To do a postgraduate course at Harvard or Yale, you need to be the son and daughter of a multimillionaire. So actually, we are going to throw away, if we're not careful, something that's very precious, and it is actually quite unique in the world.
I just add to that the figure, the date I gave at the beginning, 1837. We've been doing this a long time. I go to China quite a lot, and they don't teach art and design in schools. They do it later on, college, university, but they don't. But they are now introducing it, and they're introducing it because they think we've got the best art and design education system in the world. So just as we're reducing it, they're introducing it. It's really interesting. And what we're seeing is a big drop-off in kids taking art and design technology for GCSE, and that's the big problem, because it doesn't matter how good the colleges and unis are, if they aren't getting the kids coming through to go to them, you're cutting, terrible phrase, but you're cutting off the supply chain. And I don't like to use that when talking about people, but you just get less people coming through the system. So that's why my charities, Francis and my charities, is concentrating on the 13 to 16-year-olds. We're trying to get them at a point where they're making life decisions. And I know you could do great work in primary schools, and I take my hat off to the colleges and unis in this country who do a great job. But my worry is we'll see less kids coming through. We'll see some people are saying, well, we don't need all these colleges, do we? Because there aren't so many kids coming through. You just listen to that. Well, there's not many kids doing this now. They can't be interested, so we don't need all the colleges. So we've got to attack it very, very hard and get the kids. Oh, by the way, the other thing I say is that we've got to get to the parents. Incredibly important. So many parents stop their kids doing art or art and design when they're 14. Why? Because they don't think there's any future in it. And this is a hugely important thing. Certain sectors of society in particular stop their kids, absolutely stop them. They want their kids to be lawyers, doctors, dentists, a couple of other things. They want them to be in what they see as the serious professions, not the ones where they might starve in a garret. So, we've got to get to everybody, actually. This is actually really a campaign, which this man's absolutely completely brilliant at. We've got to have a big campaign to get... I've got a badge, which I didn't wear tonight because I couldn't find it. But it says, the badge says, creativity, literacy and numeracy. So part of my argument to politicians is, I don't disagree that every child should be, of course, literate and numerate. Of course we all want that for our kids. But I want my kids, and their kids now, to be creative, literate and numerate. Those three things. If you argue that, I think you might stand a chance of winning.
I think the question is, how are you going to try to persuade kids to go into art and design when there is massive cuts in the same field?
But one of the things that is also happening is that if you don't teach all kids about the arts, it's also immensely damaging for museums and galleries because then they suddenly become odd buildings with objects that nobody knows what the hell they are in. And so sort of scholarship and understanding and appreciating the kind of the journey and the relationship between state funding for some kinds of art and my income comes from all sorts of things. It comes from doing projects in the public realm where I'm paid for by the state, essentially. Comes from selling paintings in the private art market. It comes from teaching, and it comes from building a kind of a broad array of things that you have to do. It's a difficult thing to say because I'm both deeply pessimistic about the capacity of our politicians to think imaginatively about really education is about showing from one generation to the next all that is wonderful about life and exciting them. And if you just give them a lunchtime menu of things which are going to enable them to get a job in a market which we don't even understand what the market will be like in 10 years' time, you're really damaging what that hand-on is. And so but I also think that there are moments where things do change, tectonic plates shift, and if we can, we will. I think if you're, people in in my generation, John's generation, I think what we're trying to say is also that there is hope. That actually arts do provide a kind of an idea of the future. They're always based on creativity and newness and developmental. So you've got to stick with it.